Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Kansas City Profiles, presented by Easton Roofing, and a fascinating conversation with author, editor, photographer, and reporter Greg Peters. He is the author of the new book, The Galloping Goose of Goessel. It chronicles the life and times of Randy Woelk, who in 1939, from the tiny town of Goessel, Kansas, broke the Kansas Relays high school mile record held at the time by Glenn Cunnigham. This is an American story of a life well lived. It is a story of the mile race and its relationship with the state of Kansas through runners like Cunnigham, like Randy Woelk, like Jim Ryan, like Wes Santee. Now, Randy Woelk's running career was interrupted and, in fact, curtailed by service in World War II, but he went on to be a father, somebody who did missionary work someone who did missionary work in Kenya. He was a salesman. He was an entrepreneur. He was a father. He was a grandfather. It's just a truly amazing story told through the eyes of his son, Larry Woelk, and told very well by Greg Peters. He will chronicle, because I can't in 1 or 2 minutes, all of the things that are between the covers of The Galloping Goose from Goessel. Our Kansas City profile, presented by Easton Roofing, is Greg Peters, and this fascinating story and multi-layered story is told next.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
Did you experience hail damage last year and never got the work done? Most insurance companies only give you a year to get the roof fixed, and if you don't get it done, you could possibly not be compensated in full for the replacement of your roof. If you've been procrastinating getting that damaged roof taken care of, give us a call at 913-257-5426, and we'll send out an expert to help you through the process. We're never pushy, we're just here to help. Easton Roofing. Integrity matters.
We're here at the 23rd Street Brewery with Matt Llewellyn. And Matt, you've got a great menu. You fine-tuned it a little bit. Great beers. There's always something to be had to put a smile on your face at the 23rd Street Brewery.
Oh, you bet. And Brian Haney would always say, come have the Haney turkey stack. Bill Self would say, come have the Bill Self pasta. I would say, come have the Bill Self pasta. It's great. Great mac and cheese, buffalo mac and cheese. And we've got a ton of other menu items that you're sure to love. We've got a great brewer who's brewing great beer. And if you like craft beer, our guy's the way to go. And we're making great drinks, too. There's a great new distillery in the state of Kansas called Llewellyn Distillery. My brother's doing that. He makes some great whiskey and vodka and rum, and we're doing all kinds of great drinks with those beverages.
Always fun to be had at the 23rd Street Brewery, 23rd and Castle. Come on by anytime and have a good time.
If you'd like to join these and other fine sponsors and market your business on Kansas City's #1 rated podcast, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to working with you.
Greg, I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. This book, The Galloping Goose from Goessel, is so interesting on multiple levels. It's a story of a father and a son, and your telling of that story, and the mile run and what an impact it has on the state of Kansas through the years, and the World War II and the Great Generation, and all kinds of different things tied into one. But your story, how you got to this point, is pretty fascinating, too, as a writer and editor and photographer. Tell us a little bit about that.
Over the years, I've always been a good writer for being a photographer and a good photographer for being a writer. So I guess I was the original hybrid person as far as multimedia. I started out in Junction City, where I was a sports editor there, and also I got to cover the first bowl game that K-State played in ever. I was down in Shreveport on a cold, misty night. From there, I went to Hutchinson, worked in their sports staff and on their photo staff for a while. I guess I was there for 5 years. While I was there, I shot a picture that ended up being in the Game Face exhibit in the Smithsonian and part of their traveling exhibit in their book. And from there, I went to grad school at Missouri, where I was involved in digital photography and wrote the first textbook that they used at Missouri on digital photography to teach that. At that point, there were only like 2 schools in the country that were teaching anything about digital photography. And I guess I was probably the first or one of the first to actually go on site to a Pascal Regional in Virginia and transmit a picture back from Missouri playing Of course, Missouri lost in the first round, so I only had one opportunity. But that was quite an experience. And from there, I parlayed that into a job in Columbus, Ohio at the Dispatch, which was one of the first all-digital newspapers at that time, not only in the photo department and the graphics or in the actual production of the newspaper. Our office was downtown, and the printing plant was 16 miles away. So we paginated over T1 lines. And I guess from there, I went to Columbia, South Carolina, which is really good photo newspaper, and we were on the East Coast, obviously. And when 9/11 happened, we were able to turn the newspaper around, and we put out an afternoon edition by 11 o'clock that morning. So we were probably the first newspaper on the East Coast to have a paper hit the streets. And then our front page was named the best front page for the day after by the National Press Photographers. And gosh, one of the biggest things was when they brought the Confederate flag off the State House dome. We were there for coverage on that. That was just an amazing time to be living through history while that was going on.
Right.
And along the way, I got to cover 5 Masters for McClatchy, so that was fun too. We were the home newspaper for that, so I was part of the team that went over and transmitted pictures and all that stuff. And then back to Kansas City, which is kind of my home area, to work for the Star, and then I worked for a couple of websites. And then I got to go, I worked for a few years at AU Medical Center. First I worked for the School of Health Professions. Then I worked for the school, all the schools actually at the Med Center, the School of Nursing and the School of Medicine. I got to write about all the different things. I'd like to say I was just smart enough to get out of the way and let people tell their stories and string them together. And that kind of whet my appetite to do more.
And so that brought you to the process of this new book, which is The Galloping Goose from Goessel. And not surprisingly, a bit of a family connection is what led to that.
Yes, actually, The Galloping Goose was my uncle, Randy Woelk. In our family, there are waves of cousins and grandchildren. I was part of the young wave, so I didn't know too much about Randy. He was already, I want to say in his 60s or 70s when I was hanging around with grandparents, and his kids were all grown, and they were part of the first wave. But the nice thing about this book is it's kind of reunited Larry and I, which has been really nice. It's been fun to learn more about Larry. He's been a very successful businessman in Europe for quite a while.
He lives in London, and so he always was telling tales about his dad, Randy, and we'll get into his accomplishments and his journey, which was so, sort of, a heroic journey that so many people had to go through, where their life was, short-circuited by giant events of world import. And but how did you decide that this was be a cool project to take on?
Well, actually, when I worked at KU, I was approached to do a story about one of the professors who spent time in Ghana working with. They just take donations for respiratory care equipment, and they pretty much just put it on a trailer or a seatainer and ship it over there every year. And they just things that hospitals here don't want anymore, and they just bring it to the people who really need it over there. And in fact, KU was instrumental in establishing the first respiratory therapy program to make it a profession in Ghana. And I know across Africa they were really interested in learning more about what KU had. And the first cohort of students from Ghana actually came on board working right when the pandemic hit in Africa. So that all worked out really well for them. Anyway, long story long, they introduced me to a doctor from over there who was also worked in an emergency room on the mother of a woman from California, and they were going to meet at KU for the first time in real life. And that was the first book I started working on. They reached out to me later after they liked the story so much. They reached out a couple years later and said, "Would you write our book?" And it was all about the woman from California and her mentally ill mother, and the struggles of growing up with a mentally ill mother and being abandoned and abused. And actually, Alfred, the doctor in Ghana, is a Christian minister as well, and he kind of tended to the entire family. And it's just it's just a great read. I mean, it's just the woman just pours her soul out, telling him everything that went into Alfred, how he tended to their entire family.
And that book was called Who Will Be My Mother's Keeper? And while you were doing this book, Larry lives in London, and you had sort of started connecting again, and he would keep telling stories about his dad, Randy, the Galloping Goose.
When I was at the Star, I did a lot of research on the photo desk, trying to find stories all the time. You're always looking on the internet for something. And I just happened to look up Marion County athletes. I don't know why, but they're the top 100 athletes from Marion County, which is where Goessel is. And the last name on the list is Randy Woelk. It's like, I have an uncle, Randy Woelk. Well, then I started putting the numbers together, and they said, the Galloping Goose from Goessel. It's like, we laughed about it as a family for quite a while, and then I started talking to Larry, and he goes, yeah, my dad was a Galloping Goose. I said, I've never heard that story before. But that was kind of planted the seed, and then, as this first book got finished, we were talking more and more, and Larry just had some great stories. Some I could get the facts on, and some that were just good family tales. So
right.
It was really inspiring, just the name alone. He had me at the Galloping Goose.
Well, it's a great title, and it's a great story, and it is an truly American story, which involves World War II and everything else. But the Galloping Goose is raised on a farm north of Newton, Kansas, which is actually the hometown of my wife. And it was a farm existence that's very typical, but he became a runner and a basketball player, and you're talking about a small town, so you get to play all the sports. But he, despite maybe an unusual style, he became a very accomplished miler. And the story of the mile in Kansas and its derivations through many, many great runners, Glenn Cunnigham, Jim Ryan, many others. Jim Ryan wrote the foreword for this book. Is all woven together.
I think if people don't know Glenn Cunnigham, whose record the Goose beat at the KU Relays, he beat his high school category record at the KU Relays for the mile by a tenth of a second, I think. If you don't know Glenn Cunningham's story, you need to get a book and read about it. Just a tremendous story. He was a rock star as far as milers go. Mm-hmm. He's one of the original rock stars. The fact that he never ran a sub-4 minute mile is just crazy. I want to say at one point he had, of all the top times in the world, he had 6 of the 13 top times. Mm-hmm. And, to be a kid from Goessel, which is, barely a wide spot in the road, and to be the record of such a acclaimed champion it's just overwhelming. But yeah, there's a great tradition going back to Cunningham and Archie San Romani, and mm-hmm. I'm missing all the names, but he goes all the way up through Jim Ryan, and he's probably the crowning point, although there are several other sub-4 minute milers who came from Kansas. And
Wes Santee and others, right? So
yeah,
an incredible tradition. And, of course, Kansas had an incredible track and field program through the years, and especially at its height maybe during the 30s, 40s, 50s, that particular time. But Goose...
Randy had a chance to run for KU.
Right.
The track coach there offered him a suit to come and compete in the track, but Emporia could get his dad a job cleaning highways during the Depression, and that was a much better gig.
There it was. So he decided to go to Emporia State, which was the Kansas State Teachers College at Emporia then, and he, after a bout with illness his freshman year, an emergency appendectomy, he did have a pretty accomplished college career as well.
He did. Emporia State has been real helpful as far as getting the research, but the farther you go back in records, regardless of the story, the fewer records you can actually put your fingers on. Mm-hmm. I didn't have really much information to go on there, but he had a good career, and he and his wife had their first child while he was still in school, and then of course World War II broke out. After Pearl Harbor, Randy and his brother Ron both decided that they would set aside their conscientious objector status and enlist in the Army. They thought it was more important to defend their country than it was to follow their I don't know, what would you say?